Our webinar is Action Steps to a Positive Work Culture. My name's Matt San Regret, and I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Payroll Systems. Few housekeeping items as we get started. First and foremost, we're going to have everybody muted for the webinar today. So on your end, feel free to make as much noise as you want. If you're lucky enough to be working from home and the dog's barking in the background or the doorbell's ringing, don't worry, that will not bother the other attendees or the presenters. We certainly do want to encourage a group discussion though, so even though you can't talk, let's use the chat or question feature of the webinar software. So familiarize yourself with those right now. There should be a question section. We will be monitoring those during the presentation. If it is timely to answer the question right then and there, we will do so. If it makes more sense to delay that till the end of the presentation, we are saving time at the end of the presentation for a formal Q&A as well. Also, as part of the webinar software, we've posted today's presentation along with some information on payroll systems, so feel free to download those. They're in the handouts section. And I think that about covers everything. At the end of the webinar, we will be posting contact information as well. So anybody who wants to continue the conversation, either with our guest speaker or with payroll systems, we would welcome that as well. So let's go ahead and get started in the interest of everybody's time. Again, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. Today we're talking about action steps to a positive work culture. So positive work culture, that sounds pretty good. We're in a pretty tight job market these days. We thought it might be a good idea to share some ideas on creating a positive environment to help with employee retention, help with morale around the company. And our goal is that you get some nice takeaways today from the presentation. For everybody not familiar with payroll systems, we are a leader in services such as payroll, time and attendance tracking, consumer-directed healthcare plan administration, as well as human capital management software. And we've been around for about 30 years. We're based in the San Francisco Bay Area, clients from as small as 1 to well over 1,000 employees throughout the United States. Today, I'm really pleased to introduce our guest speaker, and that's Mattice Zundel. Catherine, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. Catherine's president of Civility Partners. Civility Partners is a full-service consulting and training firm. Catherine is currently the president of the National Workplace Bullying Coalition and has authored a book on the topic of bullying. Her firm, Civility Partners, offers coaching, consulting, and training services to any size organization and works with a variety of industries. So once again, Catherine, thanks for taking time out of your busy day to join us. And with that, I'm going to let you take over, and I'm going to let you introduce the agenda and give your presentation.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I hope you all have your pens and notepads out because I intend to give you a ton of information over the next hour. I like to keep my webinars jam-packed with actual tangible tips. We're not going to get too theoretical here today. You're going to get a wealth of information on things that you can do to create a better work environment. Just to share a little bit about how I came to be an expert in the topic of toxic work environments and ultimately building positive work environments. I was a director of human resources for a nonprofit organization here in San Diego where I live, and this was over a decade ago. And I found myself working with a bully, and this person was just an uber excessive micromanager. He yelled, he made life uncomfortable, and I felt personally bullied by this individual. But then as the director of HR, I also experienced all of the organizational problems that he created. So I was really getting bullied kind of from both sides as a person and also as an organizational representative. And during that time, I started getting my master's degree. I'd really wanted to understand this horrible situation I was in. I couldn't figure out why the president wouldn't speak up. I sort of saw it as all of these people in the office were essentially allowing this person to act that way because none of us were speaking up, and just really became fascinated with what I was dealing with at work from an academic perspective, and did most of my research in grad school around workplace bullying specifically, and how to solve it. And from there, I jumped right out of grad school into writing my first book, Back Off: Your Kick-Ass Guide to Ending Bullying at Work, and have since written another book, Seeking Civility, which is more focused for leaders and things that you can do as leaders and HR managers to create a better work environment. And I've actually just recently released a third book, which is a collection of stories from people who were bullied and feel that they've really survived and thrived as a result of their situation. So they have kind of similar stories as I do, where they felt bullied and have turned that problem into something really amazing. So I want to open your mind today a little bit about negative behaviors and how closely they're related. I know we're all focused on harassment prevention these days, especially in California. The laws just changed around training for that, but everybody's focused on it with the Me Too movement, no matter where you are. And then really, I'm going to walk you through a bunch of different steps, including how do you get your leadership to care about building a better work environment, how to build a strategic plan using your core values. And also I'll talk with you a bit about some coaching methods that you can use to address people engaging in negative behaviors. As Matt mentioned, since grad school over those last 10 years, I've had the opportunity to appear in a lot of cool places. I was a contributor to Forbes for a year and have appeared on NPR and CNN and some other cool spots. And my clients really do run the gamut. So I've seen it all, ranging from Fortune 500s down to tiny little banks in the middle of nowhere and everything in between. So let's jump in. 75% of people who feel harassed never report it. Why would that be? Why in the world would 75% of people who feel harassed, why wouldn't they tell their employer about it? And this number comes from the EEOC as well as SHRM. They both did their own separate research projects and they both came to this number of 75%. So you're probably saying retaliation. People don't report harassment because they fear retaliation. Well, that is the number one reason according to the EEOC. But I got to ask you, if retaliation is against your corporate policy and it's also against the law, then why in the world are people afraid of retaliation? And the answer is your organization creates a fear for retaliation. So just to talk through this a little bit, when you have things like incivility and unprofessionalism occurring, then people start to recognize that you're not stepping in and it's allowed to go on. And that creates a culture where bad behavior is allowed to go. And, people aren't afraid or are too afraid to speak up. People aren't comfortable to report bad behavior. So I see this all the time with my clients where, for example, I specialize in coaching workplace bullies, those highly valued executives or VPs or directors or even CEOs who engage in bullying behaviors. Maybe they're gruff or abrasive and they make people uncomfortable. And as long as that behavior occurs and it's not being addressed in the minds of your employees, they will never tell you about harassment. And so your culture could really be facilitating this fear of retaliation. And so it's something you have to think about. And that's where creating a positive work environment is really going to be the ultimate for solving bullying, solving harassment, and solving incivility and professionalism, or at least minimizing it. So I see all of these negative behaviors as behaviors that are completely related. We like to try to put them in boxes, especially something like harassment is very much in a box because of the law. But I'm hoping to change your paradigm here a little bit. So hopefully you've got some coffee and you're willing to be open-minded. So if you have incivility and unprofessionalism and it's not being addressed, and it often is not because you probably don't have a policy around civility, and managers probably aren't trained on coaching people who are uncivil. So what happens is if that behavior goes on, it absolutely over time can escalate into workplace bullying. I have been reading academic research on the topic of workplace bullying for a long time. And I can tell you that 99% of the research on how bullying unfolds proves that it starts with incivility. So very rarely does a bully kind of start on their first day of work, guns slinging, and they're throwing punches and they're bullying from day one. It escalates over time. I'll share an example with you. We have a really big client right now in the Bay Area of California, and it all started with a woman who, she was the only woman on her team. It was IT, and she felt that people were dismissing her, rolling their eyes when she talked in meetings. She was just being sort of ostracized as the woman and not being treated or given the same amount of value as the men on her team. And when she talked to her manager about it, he would say what most managers say in that situation, which is, it sounds like it's a conflict issue. Why don't you go and see if you can figure out how to resolve it? And sometimes he would say, well, that's not really illegal behavior. I'm not really sure what you want me to do with this information. How in the world could I fix that for you? And so he just didn't really know what to do. And over time, the eye rolling and the being dismissive escalated into her filing a gender discrimination complaint, and it being a very public gender discrimination complaint, and 5 other women who had been in that same department coming forward and saying, me too, I experienced that. So, again, it just started off so simple, and now it's expensive and public, and it's a big mess. So here's where I differ from the law. Um, if the bullying is aimed at a protected characteristic, then we call that harassment. So write this down. Bullying and harassment are the same behaviors. Bullying and harassment are the same behaviors. The law says if the bullying is aimed at someone because of their race, religion, sexual orientation, etc., then that's called harassment. But if somebody is bullying lots of people and there's no rhyme or reason to it, they're an equal opportunity bully, then that's called bullying. And in California, we call it abusive conduct. But bullying and harassment are the same. So I see harassment and discrimination as a subset of workplace bullying. The law doesn't see it that way, but this is a more accurate description. There's another type of subset of bullying, which is mobbing and hazing. This is a group of people bullying one person, and they have an opposite effect. So hazing, or opposite intention, I guess. Hazing is about bullying people until they sort of become a part of the cool crowd, and now those people can be in and they'll be accepted, and the hazing will stop. Mobbing, however, refers to pushing people out. So if a clique, for example, a clique of women who have worked together for 20 years and some new person gets hired in, it's possible they would mob that new person and in the effort to try to get him or her to leave because they don't want that new person there. So that's an example of mobbing. I also have conflict there. Conflict is not necessarily negative, of course, but it can be. So certainly conflict can include incivility and unprofessionalism for one or both sides. And conflict can escalate into workplace bullying. So eventually, if the conflict is not resolved, people can, one or both sides can escalate into bullying the other person. And interestingly, a lot of times when you have a bullying situation at work, both parties, both sides, both the target and the bully, quote unquote, will claim that the other one is bullying them. So they both feel like targets of bullying. It's very interesting. So lastly, to drive my point home about harassment and workplace bullying and how similar they are, we have to remember that harassment is a form of discrimination, right? And it's unwelcome conduct based on race, color, religion, etc. However, if you look at the definition of harassment when it comes to what makes it unlawful, that second half of it, the law says that harassment is unlawful when enduring the conduct is a condition of employment, or it's severe or pervasive enough a person would find it intimidating, hostile, or abusive. So if you look at what's on the pink side of your screen, that's describing workplace bullying too. So again, the only difference between harassment and bullying is that first part, that it's based on, protected characteristic. So lastly on my spectrum is workplace violence. And, of course, violence can include guns and punching and fights and things like that. But violence really starts long before that. And in fact, workplace violence experts will tell you that there are three levels of workplace violence. The first level being fear and intimidation, which includes making threats, um, things like I know where you live or you'll be sorry, things like that count as workplace violence. And OSHA, in its definition of workplace violence, does include verbal threats. So bullying can escalate into violence or cross over into violence pretty easily. So they're not so separate either. Just to give you an example of that, one individual that I coached, he was a yeller, and much like many of his own leaders. So he was the CTO of a 5,000 person company that executed on technology products. And he was kind of a golden goose. He was very valuable. He created and executed ideas that made the company millions of dollars. And he was a yeller. And one time he yelled so crazy at someone that this person had a panic attack and was drug away from work in an ambulance because of the physical panic attack that they had at work as a result of being yelled at. Now, this guy had been yelling for a long time. There was nothing different about this particular time that he was yelling. It was just that this employee finally cracked at the yelling and couldn't take it anymore. So the point of this whole thing is to understand that these behaviors all interact together. Somebody can weave in and out of bullying and incivility. Harassment and bullying are the same. So paradigm shift for you that I'm asking you to make is to not consider these behaviors as behaviors that occur in boxes. I know sometimes you have to because of the law, but I'd like you to go past that. So any questions on this, Matt? This might be a good place to stop. Do we have any questions on this this spectrum?
Yeah, not as of right now.
Okay, perfect. I shall keep going. Feel free to comment. I'd love to chat with you along the way. Okay, so one of the problems I saw in the Me Too movement is that a lot of the employer advice around policy, or I'm sorry, around harassment was focused on policy and training. So it was like every article I read that said, now what, Me Too and all this, what does an employer do in a Me Too world? Unfortunately, all of the advice I saw, even from fantastic magazines like Harvard Business Review and Forbes, were giving terrible advice. They were all saying, check your policy, get your training done, as if that was going to solve your culture somehow, and as if that was going to cause society's culture. But let's take a look at the training we've been doing. This is an agenda from SHRM's sexual harassment training. So you can download trainings and things from SHRM if you're a member. And check it out. Agenda item number 2, why is it important to prevent sexual harassment in our workplace? So there is a bullet point about why it's important to prevent harassment, but there's nothing in there about how to prevent it. So SHRM's missed the boat there. Another example. This is from Cal Chamber. You can download a list of kind of like a checklist that you can compare your sexual harassment training to make sure it's compliant. And notice this one little piece here that I've got the arrow to, strategies to prevent harassment in the workplace. So unfortunately, in California, for example, our harassment prevention training is really focused on the law. Look at all this stuff that people have to know related to the law. And there's this tiny little blip about strategies to prevent harassment. So I just find that what we've been doing so far really ain't working. So what you need to do instead is focus on these 3 areas. So of course you need to have a policy in place. You need some rules to govern people by. But leadership has to be on board for creating a positive work environment that doesn't tolerate harassment or bullying or incivility or violence. And then you have to focus on everybody's behavior. So training is a piece of that. Training helps you drive behavior, but it's certainly not going to change behavior. So I'm going to give you tips moving forward on all 3 of these areas. It's important to address negative behavior as a cultural phenomenon inside your organization, as a systematic, social phenomenon. It's not a problem between two people. And so let me talk about that. So this is the way bad behavior looks in your organization. So you have your bad actor. This could be anybody engaging in incivility or bullying or harassment or any type of inappropriate behavior. So that bad actor, of course, has a relationship with the target or targets, and that relationship is made up of a power imbalance. So what happens is the bad actor engages in some slight, maybe a nasty email or something, and nobody says anything about it. And the target doesn't say anything about it. So over time, the behavior becomes more and more frequent and more aggressive, and this power imbalance unfolds. And eventually, the bad actor comes to realize that they have psychological power over the people around them, and the target comes to realize that this bad actor has psychological power over them. And of course, that is quite damaging for the target. You also have organizational members playing a role in this. So a lot of my colleagues use the phrase witness or bystander, and I don't like those words. I think a better word is reinforcer. So consider this. If you go to work every day and you know of bad behavior and you're not stepping in, you are giving permission to engage in that bad behavior. Your silence is loud and clear that that behavior is tolerated, and that makes you a reinforcer. And anybody in the organization who works around this situation, this relationship, who knows that there's a bad actor and a target or targets, anybody who's aware of that and who doesn't step in is a reinforcer. Again, the silence is loud and clear. So consider this for a minute, as you're looking at this. So I get calls from HR professionals all the time who have decided that finally their bully in their organization has crossed the line and that bully needs coaching. This person's been allowed to act that way for, 10, 12, 15, 20 years. And all of a sudden something happened, like the guy that I coached who caused a panic attack. He'd been yelling like that for a long time. Finally, something cracked, and the organization said, we really have to step in. That HR professional who calls and says, I can't, I've got this person, I need you to coach them. That individual is the same person who's responsible for harassment prevention. And so here this person is sending a mixed message. They're saying, this person's going to be allowed to bully. I'm not going to step in, but here I want everybody to watch a harassment prevention training video or attend a harassment prevention program. So there's a real mixed message there. And that goes back to what I said at the very beginning, that people fear retaliation if you're not sending the message that the bad behavior is not okay. So reinforcers are supporting the bad actor and damaging the target. And on the other side, your culture itself plays a role. So for example, researchers have done a lot of research on organizational culture and how it might facilitate harassment and workplace bullying. And what they find, for example, is organizations that have a lot of men at the top who don't have a diverse leadership team, organizations that support activities where they're exclusive. So maybe a gang of guys all go out for happy hour on Fridays and women never go. Maybe a group of a certain race all go out together and don't invite others. So if you have these sort of exclusive activities going on, that seeps into the culture, and the more likely your organization is to experience harassment. In terms of workplace bullying, if your organization has a lot of bureaucracy where there's a lot of rules and regulations, then that makes it easy to bully. And so your organization is more likely to have bullying. If you have a high stress environment, your organization is more likely to have bullying. So what I'm saying is that all of this training that you're doing around harassment or things you're trying to do to accomplish resolution and create a positive work environment, if you don't address those risk factors, then you're not going to really make much of a difference. So the culture is supporting the bad actor and damaging the target by allowing these types of activities to occur. Meanwhile, the bad actor is damaging the culture and damaging the organizational members. So let's jump into some
Sounds like
tips.
you're a little bit of preventative maintenance here is the key.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes, and
hey,
that's the
we do have a
thing.
question coming,
Oh,
Catherine, as well.
oh, sure.
Yeah, you can finish that, but I think it can be addressed now or at the end. But basically, it touches on the new regulations in California, and the question was if you're going to give a quick summary of some of the new changes that happened in California as of the first of this year.
Yeah, sure, I can give that to you right now. So in California, the law was previously that if you had 50 or more employees, contractors, volunteers, et cetera, that you were required to deliver a 2-hour harassment prevention training program to managers and supervisors every 2 years. The law has changed. If you have 5 employees, volunteers, contractors, interns, whatever they are, if you have 5, you are now required to provide everybody training. So employees get an hour of training every other year, and the supervisors and managers get their 2 hours of training every other year. So what's happening is, you saw some of the things on that Cal Chamber list. So what that means is your employees are going to be educated on how to sue, what they can sue for, what happens if the organization doesn't fix it for them. So they're going to have a bunch of legal knowledge now that they didn't have before. And I've been delivering that training and seeing lots of light bulbs on the employees, above the employees' heads, like, oh, so that's harassment, and they'll ask very specific questions like, oh, so this happened, is that harassment? So it just now more than ever, it's really important to take those preventative measures and really focus on creating an environment that doesn't tolerate that. Yeah, so happy to chat more offline. We do offer that training, so happy to chat with you about it.
Perfect.
Any other questions?
Nope, that's just what we got so far.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's jump into tips now. So the first thing that you need to do if you're going to focus on harassment prevention and ultimately creating an environment that doesn't tolerate that type of behavior is getting leadership on board to commit to change, supporting any of your initiatives related to building a positive work environment, and of course, being involved in the process. So at the very least, your leadership must be communicating that they care about this whole process of creating a positive work environment. And we see it all the time. I mean, employee engagement is a big hot topic right now. Everybody's talking about employee engagement. Everybody's talking about culture. So, my point is that you can really rely on your culture to resolve bad toxic problems that are creating liability for you. So there's 3 ways to get to your leadership. And the first way, one of 3 options, is to scare your leadership. So you might go meet with your leadership later today and let them know that you saw an amazing webinar by a workplace bullying expert, and that she pointed out how closely related bullying and harassment are, and that if you're going to allow somebody to bully, and usually that person who's being allowed to bully is a high performer, but if that continues, then what you're doing is keeping people from telling you about illegal behaviors like harassment. So if they want to stay out of legal hot water, they need to make it comfortable for people to come forward. And the way to make it comfortable is to put a stop to negative behaviors. Another option, this is the second option for getting your leaders on board, is to just talk to them about times in their life when they may have been mistreated. So depending on your relationship with them, you might be able to say, hey, look, tell me about your work history. Have you ever been mistreated at work? Have you ever been bullied or treated rudely? And what was that like? And see if you can get them to draw out some memories of what it felt like. And, maybe they'll admit that they quit because of some terrible manager they had, or that they started showing up late, or stole products when they were 18 because they, didn't like the way they were treated. So if you can get them to kind of attach a personal story to being mistreated at work, and then you can turn it back on them and say, hey, look, so that's all the stuff that you went through. Consider that that's what your employees right now are doing. And is that really the kind of organization you want to run? So you might be able to tap into their emotions. A third option for getting to the heart of your leadership is to use data. So many leaders, those people in the C-suite, really want to understand, the monetary points. They want to understand the ROI of creating a positive work environment. They want to understand the costs of a negative work environment. So there's certainly a ton of studies out there online that you could pull from. In fact, I'll give you one right now. There's a woman named Christine Porath, Porath. She's the incivility queen, I call her. That's what she studies. She's at a business college or a business university, and has great credentials, does these studies, and then often publishes them in academic journals as well as the Harvard Business Review. So if you were just go to the Harvard Business Review, hbr.com, Christine Porath, and run that search, you'll find a lot of her articles. She has a lot of statistics that she's found. For example, people at the receiving end of incivility, of the people in her survey, 87% said that they spend the whole day avoiding the person that is engaging that behavior. So you can pull some of those numbers. You could also open up an Excel sheet, just a blank Excel sheet, and start figuring out how much money and time and resources this behavior has costed you. How much time have you spent counseling people? How much time have people spent gossiping about this? So you might be able to really come up with some costs, and that's a great way to get your employer's attention to the importance of creating a better work environment. Tip number 2, conduct an assessment. So I know a lot of times we hear of hostile work environments, we get those complaints, and we immediately turn to an investigation. An investigation is, to focus on that one particular story, to determine if that story is essentially true or not, or can be proven or not. And that's what the investigation is for. But I've known for a long time and see it all the time that where there's smoke, there's fire. So the investigation is, again, just about that one story. An assessment is going to give you a much better understanding of what's happening in your organization. So here's what I recommend. If you're already doing some sort of employee survey, an engagement survey, or a job satisfaction survey, or something, if there's some sort of employee survey that you're already doing, then just go ahead and slide these 3 questions in there and ask people to rate them. You don't even need your CEO's permission, just slide it in there. And then you can see, would people really tell us if there was something terrible going on? Would they speak up for themselves? Do they consider this a positive work environment? And then you can use those 3 questions to say, hey, look, I noticed there's a problem here. We only have 10% of people who said they report harassment. That's a problem, and we need to fix it. So this could kind of make you a business case for you. The other option is
Hey,
to
Catherine,
get the
got
permission.
a interesting one when you're ready for another break.
Sure, I'm ready. Go for it.
Yeah, this is right on this topic, and I think what you've been discussing is very pertinent. What would you recommend when the bad actor is the wife of the COO and also works in the same organization, and the owner or CEO values them both very highly? We got spousal influences here.
Yeah, that's a difficult one. So hopefully you have the right kind of relationship with your CEO that you could talk to him or her about this wife and how she's behaving. I recommend giving some specific examples of the behavior and how you've seen it negatively affect people and the organization. Of course, you have to be careful about how you're going about it. Really focus on the facts, so it's doesn't feel like you're attacking that person. That that wife is valued and the COO is valued. So I would just approach it like, hey, I need to talk to you about this behavior. I'm seeing other people have been complaining to me, and I'm hoping that I can work with you to find some solutions. That conversation is definitely much more accepted if you have solutions that aren't, well, I think you should fire them. I coach people like that, so that might be one solution. We can certainly talk offline. But this is the kind, so I hear that a lot, and this is the kind of sneaky way to collect some information about it. So hopefully your organization does do some type of survey already. And honestly, if you could just sneak these questions in there as the HR representative, and say, just let your CEO know, I thought these were important, and so I asked them. You'll find that people will rate these 3 statements poorly. And if you leave a little section for them to provide their comments, a little open-ended section, please comment on your responses. People may even point out that the COO's wife is like that. And so then you'd have some data to help you manage that situation. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
All
real
right,
good. Kind of comes back to data and gathering the facts.
Yeah. So the other thing is we certainly also do climate surveys, and you don't have to use us, but that's an option, is if you can get permission to do a whole climate assessment, which is very different than an employee engagement survey. It asks different questions. One thing that's important to do is make sure you have permission to act on the climate assessment if you're going to do that full thing. So just something to consider. So the next step then is to develop action items around your assessment. So what we do when we work with clients is we do a climate assessment, and our assessments are rating a bunch of different questions. We include engagement. Those are some of the questions we're asking. How people perceive the climate, how do they trust each other, what are their relationships like, how does the communication working, and so then we collect all of that information. We also do interviews with 10% of the employee population chosen at random. And so then we collect all that information, and then we work with our clients to create an action team. And so I would encourage you to do the same. So if you're already doing some sort of assessment, you can certainly implement this on your own as well. Our action teams are made up of people from all levels of the organization. They're meant to be, representative of every level and every department and every race and religion, and we try to keep them as diverse as we possibly can. And what we do is literally create a strategic plan around the culture. And so this is an example of one plan from one of our clients. We found in our climate survey that one of the ways that we could really dictate behavior was to focus more on their core values. They had 4 core values that they weren't using ever. They were just words on the wall behind the receptionist when you walked in, and that's all they were being used for. So this was one objective, to bring those core values to life. And you can see we had 5 goals within that, and then we had a lot of action items within those 5 goals. So bottom line for you is to understand that your culture is part of your strategic plan. It's no different than the strategic plan you have for revenue growth or increasing customers. So make culture part of your strategy. Another tip for you is to implement healthy workplace policy. So your corporate policy handbook is already full of lots of things that you're not supposed to do. Why don't you implement a section that's regarding acceptable and healthy workplace behaviors? So here's how I recommend you go about doing that. I would gather all of your staff together and ask this question: how would you like to be treated at work? Give the group about 10 minutes to brainstorm with the people they're sitting with, and then collect their answers publicly. So what I always do is pull up a Word document on a screen, and so it's or it's up on the wall or on a screen, and then type in the answers as people shout out their answers. And this is a great exercise because it really demonstrates to everybody in the room that, as different as they all feel they might be, they all want to be treated the same. So it really transcends, race and gender and age. It really and truly, your groups, each group will really and truly honestly give about the same 10 to 15 answers. I see it in every industry I work in. So then you can locate themes that you see. What are those 10 or 15 things that everybody said? And then those themes go in your policy. My email address will be at the end of this presentation. Happy to send you my template if you're interested. Something else you might try doing to create a better work environment is to use your core values. And so I got to ask you, what are your core values? And I'm going to venture to guess that only some of you know your core values and know them by heart and use them every day. Most organizations really don't use core values in the way they're meant to be used. So understand that your core values are for internal use. A lot of organizations create core values and put them on their website, and that's it. But I can promise you, not a one person outside of your organization cares about your core values. And I can prove it by asking you to think if you know of any core values of any of the vendors that you use, whether at home or at work. And I guarantee you don't know the core values of any of the companies you interact with. And nobody knows your core values either. So it's nice if they're on their website, you can leave them there, but that's not what they're for. They're meant to drive internal behavior. The way to use them to drive internal behavior is to turn your core values into core job competencies. So just like your IT person has to know IT as a competency, otherwise they can't work there at your organization, you should also be saying our core values are something you have to be competent in. Let me give you an example. I did some work with a company that's a chain restaurant. They're a chili hot dog stand, kind of a restaurant. And back in the day when great grandpa started this restaurant over on the boardwalk, his whole shtick was chili, that if you ordered a hot dog from his stand, you were going to get the biggest pile of chili. And he actually would get after people for it and fire people, was the story. He was like grumpy old guy. He'd fire you if you didn't put chili on your hot dog or didn't put enough on. And so we use that as a history. And so the first core value was don't skimp on chili. But then the other core values were don't skimp on service, quality, or fun. So the idea is that you can take those three words, service, quality, and fun, and turn them into competencies. For example, you could say, in order to work at this restaurant, you have to be competent in fun. And what does that look like? It means that you're in a good mood, you laugh, you converse with people, you seem to smile a lot, you look like you're having a good time. And if you don't engage in fun, if you're not competent in fun, then you don't belong here. You don't get to work here because you're not competent in something that's required to do your job. Now, take a look at this too. It would keep out bullies, because anybody who engages in bullying behavior is not fun and they're not competent in fun. And so you can use that to say, you don't belong here. You're not competent in a required competency that you have to have. The next tip is to provide training. Now, you may already be doing that, but you got to provide better training, right? So let me share this model with you. ADDIE is a famous model. It's been around since the 70s. I encourage you to Google it when we get off. The ADDIE model has been around for a long time. It's a basic model for creating training programs. And ADDIE stands for these words here on the pink. So I want to focus on analyze. The ADDIE model suggests that if you're going to sit down and create a training program, that the first thing you should figure out is what are the behavioral outcomes. And I am sorry, it looks like my formatting is off here on this slide, so my apologies. But so analyze is what are the behavioral outcomes I'm looking for, and then you design your training around those behaviors, and then you can deliver the training. So to give you an example, that Cal Chamber thing that we saw was really focused on compliance, right? Knowing the law. Well, there's no behavior change as a result of the California compliant law. Knowing the definition of harassment doesn't change behavior. This stuff that you see on your screen, this is much better learning objectives for a training. This is much better for getting the right kinds of behaviors. So if managers could learn how to set expectations, manage negative behavior, coach negative behavior, and understand that performance management is about behavior and performance, that if they could learn how to create a positive work environment, that would be a lot better, more useful information for them than defining harassment. And so these are the kinds of things that we insert wherever we can in our harassment prevention training, because they're much more preventative and much more useful. So consider that, do your harassment prevention training. If you're in California and a couple other states, you got to do it. But it's really not giving people the tools to engage in positive behavior. So I recommend, if you're interested in creating a positive work environment, that you provide people with the tools to engage in positive work environment types of behaviors. All right, so a couple more tips for you, and then we'll open it up for some questions here towards the end. I also recommend that you do coach abrasive leaders. So to that individual who asked about the COO's wife, this is the kind of program that I would recommend for her. You may not be able to deliver it. Maybe you can get the CEO or talk about an outsider coming in. The reality is that people who engage in that type of behavior really are completely unaware that their behavior is so damaging. They're really focused on getting the job done, and they really can change. Unfortunately, a lot of leaders, so the CEO in your case, the person who asked the question, your CEO probably assumes that this person cannot change, and because that wife is seen as so valuable and the COO is seen as so valuable, they're going to let the other stuff go without realizing the true damage it's causing. So people do assume that bullies, people who engage in negative behavior, are aware of their behavior and they really are trying to harm others, but that's not the case. They're unaware, they're focused on getting the job done, and they can change. So here's what drives bullying behavior. People who engage in bullying are focused on appearing as uber competent. So of course we all want to be seen as competent. Nobody wants to look like an idiot, but people who bully really live in dire fear of being seen as incompetent. And that's, it's like this heightened emotional awareness around incompetence. So a second piece of the puzzle is that they lack empathy or social and emotional intelligence, right? So they engage in bullying and they don't understand the damage it causes because they're lacking social and emotional intelligence. So what happens is when they perceive someone as incompetent, whether it's because they're a low performer or they made a mistake or whatever it is, that incompetence gives the bully anxiety, and they use their fight or flight mechanism, in this case fight, right? So they perceive incompetence as a threat, they engage in, or that causes anxiety, and ultimately they defend against that anxiety using their fight. What's happening around them though? Everybody else sees the bully as a threat. The bully causes them anxiety and they flee. So everybody's engaging in fight or flight, including the leaders. So if the CEO is well aware that somebody is bullying and not willing to step in, what's the CEO engaging in? Flight. They're not willing to address it. Just to give you some examples of bullies not fully understanding the impact of their behavior. This was a guy that I coached. His name was Joe. And Joe had been told over and over and over again that he should stop engaging in bullying behavior, right? And in fact, he was well aware that people had quit the company because of his behavior. He was well aware that people had transferred out because of his behavior. And his manager had spent a lot of time trying to help him see the impact of his behavior. And so when I met with Joe for the very first time, and I just kind of said, how are you feeling about coaching? Where are you at? And this is what he said to me. I've been walking around like this for 3 years and nobody told me. I wish they'd told me sooner. So it was so ironic because here he had been told so many times, but he wasn't understanding the damage of his behavior because of the way it was being told. Art, this is actually the individual who caused the panic attack. And when we were getting together and getting to know each other, he was really not understanding why he was the one being singled out for coaching. And he would say a lot up at the beginning of the coaching, why am I being singled out? Everybody else in the C-suite acts this way. And so those were the kinds of comments I was getting from him. Well, I'm just managing the way that I managed. What's the problem? And so he also was not understanding the impact of his behavior. So my coaching process answers 3 questions, and your coaching process can too. So what happens is the first question we're asking is, well, what are the negative perceptions? So what I do is interview people around the individual, and in fact, the individual that I'm coaching chooses the people that I interview. And what's interesting is, of course, a lot of times they choose the people who they think will give good feedback. And when I present to them that even their best buddies think they're terrible communicators, it's quite a shock to them. So anyway, I start off by collecting information about the negative perceptions. And then the second 2 pieces, or the second 2 questions there, are through coaching. So then we can look at the perceptions of them and say, well, why do people see you this way? What do you think? And ultimately, how can we eliminate these perceptions? And then I re-interview people about 3 or 4 months later after we've been coaching, and this is what I find. People really can change. So this previous feedback around being aggressive or publicly shaming people changes, and so there's a new reality there for the person who's engaging in bullying. So in the end, understand that diversity and inclusion, which of course falls under harassment, and or harassment falls under diversity and inclusion. D&I is not, it is a whole culture initiative. It's not an HR program. You really have to focus on your culture to create the right kind of an environment for people to thrive. And harassment prevention is also not just a training, it's a whole culture initiative. So really and truly, your focus is to create a positive work environment where negative behaviors stand out, and that's what you need to be focused on. So if just focus on creating an inclusive culture, and you'll be all good. So with that, it looks like we've got some time for questions. So again, there is my email address. Happy to send over the template healthy workplace policy. We also have a list of 30 ways to bring your core values to life if you'd like that list. So shoot me an email, happy to send that over. And Matt, let's take it away with some questions here.
Yeah, really good, Catherine. Thank you again for this presentation. Wow, we really covered a lot of ground in a pretty short period of time. A few questions have come in. The first ones are from me. This come in from 2 or 3 folks, so let me clarify this. Is basically how can I share the presentation, and can I get a copy of it? So first and foremost, there is a handout that is attached to the webinar software, to the GoToWebinar software, that's has a copy of all the slides. Second, we are recording this, and the recording will be available within 24 hours. We will be sending a link to all attendees with the recording. So then you can simply forward that along to others that were not able to make it. I'm assuming that's the goal here, and why you'd want a recording, or just to watch it over and over again like a good movie, right, Catherine?
Yeah, it's a fabulous movie. I know that I actually have a client right now who came to me through the last time I did this webinar, and what she did was send the link over to her bosses and said, you guys got to watch this. It really encompasses what we've been talking about. So yeah, hopefully you can get some of the decision makers to at least watch some bits and pieces to help you make your case.
Fantastic. So anyway, yeah, be looking for the webinar or link soon as we share the recording. Quick question, and I'd actually like to get more specifics, but it's kind of generic. How would you handle a personal situation among employees? So I guess just a couple of individual employees have personal issues. I don't know if you have a comment to that. I've asked for some more specifics here, perhaps a better example of that. But question is, how would you handle a personal situation?
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe some conflict between 2 individuals. You have to help them resolve it. because if you don't, people who know about that conflict will think that you are not trustworthy when it comes to resolving bad behaviors. So you do have to step in. Um, so a lot of times when conflict happens and one or both of the individuals goes to their manager, the manager will say things like, "Sounds like conflict. You two need to work it out." Um, we're dealing with a situation right now where the manager said, "Well, why don't you two go have some coffee and work through it?" Well, that's not a good answer. So the manager or you has to be a coach for both of these individuals and find out what's the conflict about, what do they both need to resolve it. So have that conversation individually. What would you need in order for this to feel resolved so that you could move on, and ask the other party the same question and help them find a way to resolve it. If they're not able to resolve it through some coaching, I might recommend changing their shifts or moving one person out. But you have to figure out a way to get in the middle and put a stop to it. If it's allowed to go on, it can escalate, and whether it escalates or not, it's creating a negative work environment. And as long as it's not resolved, people will not tell you about other problems because they can see you're not resolving this problem. So engaging in coaching with the two of them is my answer. I would also say, in talking to the two of them about how they're feeling, one of them or both of them may say, "I feel bullied by the other one." And if that's how one or both of them feel, do not put them in a conflict mediation situation. Do not bring in a conflict mediator to sit them down across from the table and duke it out, because the power imbalance is too great if one or both feel bullied. So that would be like telling a battered wife to go through conflict mediation with her spouse, right? So some things to be aware of. Happy to talk with you more about the details offline if you want to shoot me an email. But that's the answer. You have to coach them both into resolution. And it may take a while, but you got to keep following up until it's resolved.
Perfect. And I guess the follow-up here, and this is a little bit of a different topic as well, would be what if it wasn't officially reported? What if it's just, kind of a rumor, an office rumor going around? Any advice for that type of situation?
Absolutely. So I hear that all the time from HR. It's like, well, if you don't tell me the names, then I can't investigate it, right? That is not the case. You don't need to know all the gory details to step in. So if there are some rumors about somebody's behavior, then I would go to that person and here's what you say. And also I can send you, we have an actual script for you to use that was not in this presentation, but you literally say to them, "I am hearing about the way that you behave, and here are some examples of what I'm hearing, and that this rumor about your behavior has to stop. People can't perceive you this way." And of course, the person's going to respond with, "Well, who told you that? Don't you want to know my side? You're on their side. It wasn't me." But, so you'll get a lot of justifications for the behavior or defensiveness. And that's okay. So allow that to come out. And then your response to that defensiveness is, "Look, I don't need to know the whole story. I don't need to do an investigation. I know one fact, and that's the only fact I need, which is there are perceptions that your behavior is, perceived as too abrasive or whatever it is. And that has to change. That rumor about your behavior has to stop. And if it doesn't stop, then here's the path we're going to have to go down." So you don't need to prove that the rumor is true. You just need to prove that, or they just need to know that that one fact about the rumor has to change. And then from there, of course, you want to say that rumor has to stop. People can't perceive you that way. But here, let's talk about resources. And so then it's a performance management conversation. What can we do to change that perception of you? What do you need from me? How can we coach you to engage in different behavior? And then you hold them to a performance management process, just like you would if they were late all the time or not meeting a sales quota or whatever else they might be doing. Bad behavior is a performance problem, and you should be using your performance system to resolve it, just like any other performance problem.
Really good info. Thank you, and hope that answered the question posted. We'll again leave the contact information up for just another minute or two, and stick around for if anybody has any further questions. It has been exactly an hour, so we do want to let everybody get back on with their day as well. So again, I'm going to formally conclude the webinar at this point in time. We'll leave the information there and certainly be around for another minute or two, but thanks again for everybody for taking an hour today to chat with us. You will be getting a recording, and I hope this was a very useful presentation. Thanks again, Catherine.
Thank you. Yep, happy to stay for another minute or two if there's any other questions.
Yeah, and I think people are winding down, so I'm gonna formally conclude the webinar. So let everybody get on with their day. Thanks, Catherine. I'll let you go.
Thank you. Bye.
You bet.